Most educated people claim to have a favorite philosopher, and you probably have one. And if you attended college and for whatever reason you decided to commence a course of study in politics or political science, more likely than not you became acquainted with the favorite Greek philosopher Plato and his book about the Republic. If you acquired no further knowledge of Plato and his Republic, his philosophy of education may have found some resonance with his allegory of the cave, when suddenly everyone was compelled to stay at home, and during a time when suddenly and abruptly most of what was once known as traditional worship and school had become adversely affected by an invisible enemy known as a novel coronavirus, SARS-CoV-2. And for those in the days since college who may have forgotten, or even for those less educated and enlightened, as we say, the Republic of Plato is basically a narrative about philosophical conversations between his teacher Socrates, a philosopher every attorney certainly knows from suffering the Socratic method of learning in law school, and his teacher's friend Glaucon, that are related to students of philosophy for a vicarious experience of reference. And the allegory of the cave describes a primitive condition where most men are found to be prisoners in a cave, where a beam of light from above casts shadows down upon the walls of the cave that become incorporated into their sense of reality, lacking any understanding of their source and origin or their cause. For their reality, for all intents and purposes, has been restricted to the reality of the inside of a cave, bathed by the light-casting shadows far beyond their comprehension. And if you are stuck in a Platonic cave, compelled to learn about the realities of a novel coronavirus from the shadows cast upon the walls of a cave, at least a Greek philosopher like Plato, and even his teacher Socrates, who considered themselves on a higher level of understanding, having been released from the perceived realities of living in a cave and disabused of their prior errors, notions, and misunderstandings of the true realities, to acquire what he called not enlightened, but a beatific vision. He would, as the narrative records, facilitate himself on the change in himself and pity those like yourself who remain in the errors, misperceiving reality in their existence as prisoners living in a cave. And most people who are highly educated and enlightened would agree that Plato and his teacher Socrates, and even his teacher Aristotle before him, were some pretty highly educated and logical gentlemen. And if you remain in a cave existence, it may well pain you to look up into their light, for the express purpose of enduring that painful experience of being disabused of false notions and sophomoric fallacies, to grasp a reality and beatific vision that all three of these favorite Greek philosopher gentlemen were convinced of an existence of God by simple logical deduction. But having begun in the classical sense of in medias res, or things in the middle, as we understand from the Latin phrase, for the next few minutes, let's pay that beatific vision forward by proceeding from the first cause of that level of understanding, applying Aristotelian logic derived from his work on physics, science, which we all recognize as science, to apply to a caveman's conception of a novel coronavirus, or more properly, its Aristotelian end, purpose, or final cause of the disease condition of COVID-19. This may be of some importance for those who are not amongst the 1.3 million Virginians who have already early voted. But for those that perhaps want to be more informed, perhaps this block of instruction will be of some assistance. As you may recall from Aristotle's work on physics, science, he understood the world and its realities as being presented to our understanding in the forms of what he called four natural causes. And the potentially lethal disease of COVID-19 is what most modern scientists, medical professionals, virologists, and epidemiologists would recognize as the end purpose or final cause of being infected by a novel coronavirus identified as SARS-CoV-2, as Aristotle would describe as the material cause. Second cause, a virus, or specifically a human coronavirus. Aristotle also recognized as a cause or reality that we can perceive in what he referred to as formal cause. And for at least a century, those engaged in the critical task of infectious disease control have validated emerging infectious diseases by testing simple propositions that are known as cautious postulates. The second of which is to isolate a pathogen suspected of causing some condition that has been found in 100% of patients presenting with a disease condition, to examine the formal substance of that suspected causative agent. And scientists have determined that SARS-CoV-2, a close cousin to SARS-CoV, or SARS, is one of 7 human coronaviruses, one of the largest classes of viruses, as well as one of the largest viruses in size and mass, all of which can be readily identified under a powerful microscope by their signature crowns of coronas that are the reason for their name. Scientists have known since the 1930s in animals that generally these coronaviruses are simply strands of ribonucleic acid, single strand of ribonucleic acid encapsulated in that very identifiable sheath adorned with the signature crowns. And since the 1960s, they have known that the human coronaviruses are adapted with a spike protein in those crowns that is better enables it to interact with the ACE2 enzyme found within the human respiratory tract cells to facilitate its attack to cause a respiratory tract infection. And there is absolutely nothing novel about that empirical fact that scientists have known for years, even if in your cave existence it is novel or new to you. For preliminary review, we have hastily examined the Aristotelian 3 causes or perceptions of reality in our cave for a disease condition, COVID-19. The material cause of a virus, the most abundant of biological particles in the world. The result or final cause, known as the disease condition of COVID-19, and the formal cause, SARS-CoV-2, that isolated pathogen with its signature crowns that have been uniquely adapted, some say through zoonotic evolution, to readily acquire a human respiratory tract cell and engage the ACE2 enzyme with its uniquely adapted spike protein to commence its attack that results in our infection. But as you may recall from philosophy class and the study of Aristotle's physics, science, that there are not just 3 causes or perceptions of reality that a man who is captive to a condition gazing upon shadows upon the wall of a cave may or may not fully comprehend or understand, but rather 4 Aristotelian causes, the 4th of which is referred to as the agentive cause, or how a particular reality works. And believe it or not, it is this very aspect that you may find most confusion about in your existence in a cave, because even most of the scientists projecting these shadows on your cave wall are apparently, and some admittedly so, lost in obfuscation by the presentation of what has been popularly described as a novel coronavirus. So, as we move towards conclusion, let's try to disabuse ourselves of some of the notions, try to understand more fully the shadows being cast upon our walls in our cave existence by light from above. Agent of cause. Agent of cause. What 9 months into the introduction of COVID-19 to America? 6 months into the introduction of COVID-19 to the Commonwealth of Virginia, do you know about agent of cause for COVID-19? Probably most by now can probably recite by rote a simplified statement of agent of cause for the disease condition of COVID-19. COVID-19 is caused by medium to large droplets expelled when infected persons cough, sneeze, talk, or perhaps even sing. And when these medium to large droplets are introduced to the entrances to the respiratory tract of a healthy person or enters into a healthy person's nostrils or mouth, they become infected. But is that a sufficient comprehension of agent of cause to prevent the spread of infection? To prevent you from being infected? Nearly 8.5 million people in America have been infected with the disease condition of COVID-19. That is equal to the size of the entire population of the Commonwealth of Virginia. Over 225,000 have died, and infections continue to develop every day despite facial coverings and business closings and social distancing. 57% of African Americans and Latinos are personally concerned that they will be infected with COVID-19. 60% of African Americans in Richmond, with only 47% of them in the population, have died of COVID-19. So on all evidence, this simple statement regarding the means of transmission has been, at least for them, insufficient to prevent the spread of infection thus far. So what more would you need to know regarding Aristotelian agent of cause to ascend from the dark depths of Plato's cave in the Republic? Let's utilize the Socratic methodology by introduction of an analogy. To date, according to Governor Northam, over 1.3 million residents of Virginia have cast their votes under the early voting procedure. 1.3 million is the size of the entire active duty military force, approximately 2.3% of whom have been laboratory confirmed for infection with COVID-19, and 8 have died. If the entire United States military were to arrive at the same time in the Commonwealth of Virginia, would it be possible for them not to be noticed, to be an invisible enemy just blending in with the environment? Is 1.3 million voters in Virginia enough to determine the winner of the November election? It could be. But you would need to develop more of an understanding of the agent of cause, like how many total votes need to be cast. But that is knowledge that cannot be known until the end of the extended voting period. So through this exercise in logical reasoning, we now know that to determine which presidential or senatorial candidate won in Virginia, we would have to possess some more quantitative information. Just knowing that as many people as who are in the active duty military have already voted is insufficient and imperfect knowledge about agent of cause. And the same holds true for comprehending the agent of cause for a novel coronavirus that is said to result in the disease condition of COVID-19. And believe it or not, 9 months into the introduction of a lethal pandemic pathogen, not even one scientist has yet determined that quantum or infectious dose that is required to be transferred from the viral load of an infected person to you or another healthy person to deliver an infectious dose that will cause you or them to be infected, become sick, or perhaps die. So you see, that is actually rather pertinent information in a pandemic crisis that neither the esteemed Dr. Anthony Fauci nor Ralph Northam, the nation's only physician currently serving as a state governor, has ever determined or provided to you. They simply issued an executive order to wear a facial covering and told you to stay at home or return to your cave. So the next question that might reasonably arise for a person acquainted with Aristotelian logic, a form of reasoning that was developed by a philosopher who actually believed in the existence of God. would be whether or not such a quantitative test is even possible for a novel coronavirus. Is it feasible? And again, the answer is yes. It is very possible and very feasible, and it was actually done by the Chinese at the initial stages of the outbreak, when they deployed teams of 5 epidemiologists to perform tracer contacts, follow-ups for over 55,000 laboratory-confirmed cases. But what they found was that there were only less than 5% of secondary infections arising among tracer contacts, the persons with whom an infected person had last been in contact. And after that study, not even the World Health Organization could conclude that an infectious disease that could be transmitted from person to person even existed. But with less than 5% of secondary infections, that was sufficient impetus for the Chinese Communist Party to completely lock down the city of Wuhan, taking away the personal liberties of their citizens, and a medical protocol that any scientist knows will inevitably and unerringly cause the infections and potentially deaths of those persons who are confined for extended periods with other potentially infected persons if an infectious communicable disease from person to person exists, effectively sealing the entrance to the cave to save the world. And that was the plan that Drs. Fauci and Northam had for America, and one that Joe Biden has embraced. So the next question that might reasonably arise upon this revelation or advanced Aristotelian understanding using logic might be whether or not it is possible to determine the infectious dose for COVID-19 to empower you as a person concerned about preventing infection. Well, certainly with other diseases, this has been done for years. Like in the case of measles, it is known by medical researchers that for tuberculosis, it takes the transfer of exactly 10 bacilli to a healthy person, breathed into their lungs to infect a healthy person with tuberculosis. Scientists were able to figure that out. Similarly, medical researchers have determined that 90% of persons with whom a person infected with measles comes in contact with also will develop that condition, if not vaccinated. And the same goes for chickenpox. But only 60% of persons with whom a person infected with smallpox will become infected with smallpox. And only 20 to 40% of persons with whom a person with the flu comes into contact will also be infected with the flu. Medical researchers have actually determined this quantitative knowledge regarding the agentive cause for other diseases. We have the technology. It can be done. But 9 months into the introduction of the pathogen to American shores, for whatever reason, that has not been done. For whatever reason, even Ralph Northam, the nation's only physician serving as a state governor, made the decision to wait for beginning to examine tracer contacts. And even today, 6 months into the introduction of a lethal pathogen that has claimed the lives of over 2,300 Virginians, over half of whom are the elderly who reside in nursing homes, a known risk at the beginning of the pandemic. He is still trying to recruit 1,300 new personnel that he had planned to hire back in April, a recruitment begun 1 month after COVID-19 arrived. A new study by CDC, based upon infections by a prison guard who visited prisoners in prison and found a guard who had returned at least 22 times to visit prisoners in the same location for at least 15 minutes, but over a period of 8 hours, and who also became infected, has given them reasons to recommend an expansion of the definition of tracer contacts, increasing the amount of work that these tracer contact personnel will have to perform when and if they are eventually hired to perform that job, but overlooking the fact that the prison guard may have simply returned 22 times to visit infected persons, but he also returned 22 times to a particular location where he may have actually been infected by that location with the disease of COVID-19. In the case of malaria and yellow fever, during the construction of the Panama Canal, over 22,000 persons needlessly lost their lives because, regrettably, even doctors remained in their caves and failed to examine the actual facts under the light. In the 18th century, over 150,000 people succumbed to yellow fever because, regrettably, again, medical doctors remained in their caves and continued to recommend that their patients simply don facial coverings to block what they called bad air, but a disease that was actually caused by mosquitoes. Similarly, today, a Nimitz-class nuclear-powered aircraft carrier, the Teddy Roosevelt, named for the very president who completed construction on that canal, found over 1,400 members of her 4,800-person crew infected by COVID-19 while sailing in open waters on the high seas, where all should have been safe. And to date, there has not been a study conducted to determine how exactly infection got on board. In Plato's Republic, towards the end of the discussion between his teacher, Socrates, and Glaucon about the inhabitants in a cave, took just a few moments to ponder what might occur if a person who had summoned the initiative to climb into the light to locate its source and to achieve a fuller comprehension of their reality was for whatever reason compelled to return. And they contemplated that life for a person who had discovered the truth through daring would constantly be frustrated among the inhabitants of the cave because they never knew anything other than their perceptions of reality in that cave and could not comprehend anything other than what they knew from their limited experience. But they further contemplated that those cave dwellers would also be disturbed by the presence of the person who had climbed up from the cave to see the light and the world as it truly is. And being far superior in number, even these wise men were not optimistic that truth would survive. But in the allegory of the cave, there is an unstated premise that the persons in that cave were prisoners and were placed there for a reason. I believe it's one of the most ghostly manifestations that I have ever seen. Whether it is real or simply conjecture, one of those things that people seeking to find some mystery to fool themselves into believing, but with some other perfectly rational cause, is a question that only you can answer with your capacity for reason. Impossible? So was Xeroxing and holography just a few years ago. In fact, so were videotape replays like the one you're watching right now. People have been claiming an existence of God for thousands of years, and maybe one day you will finally know the answers as to how and why and what. What a tremendous gain that would be for science, but what a tragic loss for storytelling. No one knows the day nor the hour when all mysteries shall be revealed, but we'll be watching and we'll be waiting in earnest, incessant, and fervent prayer for the advancement of the kingdom of God. Be sure to join us next time as events evolve with science and faith in a pandemic election that some have claimed is the presidential election of their lifetime. My name is Major Mike Webb, and I am running for U.S. Congress with liberty, honor, and excellence by God. We shall make America great again. Honest. This advertisement was authorized by Mike Webb.